Thinking positive thoughts is not enough to fuel your well-being. That's because you are an emotional being at your core. Hi, I'm Josephine Tite, founder of Positivity Center and a well-being consultant. Join me in conversation with friends who are willing to be vulnerable and share how they lean into their emotional center. Stop pouring from an empty cup, my friends, and instead lean in and learn to trust your heart. Welcome to Wellbeing That Works version 2.0, a heart-based approach. Well, hello and welcome to the show today. It's Josephine Tite, your host, and I'm joined by a really interesting guest today. It's Dave, and I met Dave in the skies. So Dave, maybe you can introduce yourself to our viewers.
My name is Dave. I'm like sort of unprofessionally called as a professional skydiver. I take people for tandem skydives, and I also work at Calgary iFly and take people for their first flights indoor skydiving. So I guess you could call me a flight instructor. There's lots of different titles, but I basically fly for a living, jump out of airplanes and go 200 miles an hour or 200 kilometers an hour on a daily basis.
So that was where we met, is you took me out of the airplane that way. And that was a very interesting experience. You've done how many dives?
I celebrated my jump number 9,000 a couple weeks ago.
And I've done one.
Yeah, and you've done one, which is more than a lot of people. So.
True. And that was, it was a really profound experience for me. Like, I would say that I didn't really experience what I thought I would in terms of an adrenaline rush or something like that. But there was just way deeper, like, layers of an onion almost that I experienced. And like, I wrote about it for 3 days because it was just so immense and intense for me. So, like, can you think back to your very first dive? Like, what was that like for you?
A friend of mine, like, I had never even crossed my mind to go skydiving. I was a semi-professional ski racer in my teens and late adult or early adult. And I just was really into water skiing in the summertime. And then a friend of mine saw a poster, learn to skydive. I'm like, never even crossed my mind. I wasn't one of those kids that always wanted to do it his whole life. I just never even thought about it. And I'm like, sure, I'll go try it. I had intentions of doing one skydive. And so my friend Trent and I, when it came time to go do it, we showed up, and it's a longer story than this, but that's another time. But anyways, we showed up, we did our skydive, and they had video on the airplane, and the video guy showed us our video of us letting go of the airplane. And it was essentially a parachute ride from 3,000 feet. It wasn't really a free fall skydive. And the guy, I remember his name is Steve, and he was like, when do you guys want to do your second skydive? And Trent and I looked at each other, and we like literally both said out loud at the same time, why would you want to skydive a second time? And long story short, half an hour later, we're doing our second skydive. And, and that was 29 years ago. And we both took it up as a hobby. Then we both got into instructing and just kept going. He did about 400 jumps, and I've turned it into a career.
Right. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. Like, so reflecting back just on sort of the initial phases and experiences that you had, like as a beginner, what was it that did it give you something? Because, I guess my main question around skydiving, because I've now experienced it, is, it's must be giving your life something, like, how does it fuel you and, like, nourish your mind, your body, your heart, like, every day? I'm so curious.
I like to think that skydiving keeps me young. Like, I work at the indoor place with a bunch of 20-year-olds, and I'm older than some of their parents, and I'm doing what they're doing. And, I've been a professional skydiver for 16 years now, and I'm 52 years old, and people think it's ridiculous that I make a living skydiving, and have been for almost 2 decades. And I used to build houses for a living with my father, and I had the opportunity to try being a skydiving instructor for one summer. And I was literally just going to do it for 5 months and then go back to construction, just to say I did it, have a life experience, have some fun. And that was 2006. And that's where my career started,
Mm.
and I just haven't looked back since.
And
So it's a really fun way to make a living.
oh my gosh, yeah. And some would also maybe say a really scary way to make a living because one of the things that I felt I noticed was like the day before, I was like, what if this is my last? My last sleep, my last kiss with my husband, my last conversation with my sister. Like it really highlighted for me the, you know what they say, live like you're dying, right?
Yeah.
Does that touch you in some way? How does that influence you? Or maybe
Well, statistically, there is a small chance that every single skydive that I do could be my last one. Um, but realistically, yeah, there's some high possible danger in it, but try to be very professional at my job. Because I've done it so much, a lot of things are automatic. And yeah, things can happen. The ground is very hard. Parachutes occasionally don't like to work properly, but that's why we have two parachutes. But life has risk. You know, People get hurt in car accidents all the time, but never stops anybody from getting in their car and going for a drive, right? So um, it's got risk, but it's got a lot of fun too.
and does the way you live in the skies transfer over to how you live other parts of your life too? Like just that risk factor, you know?
Um, Not really. I would say that I'm actually a fairly conservative skydiver. Because I've been doing it so long, I've seen a lot of stuff. I've heard a lot of stories of some wacky stuff happening to other people, and people forget that I was one of those jackasses back in the day. It's like, we call them 100 jump wonders or 200 jump wonders. If you're 25 and male and you have 200 skydives, you're in what we call a danger zone because you've been skydiving, you're having fun, you're doing silly stuff with your buddies, but nothing's ever happened. You haven't been in the sport long enough to see weird things happen or have anything happen to you. So they just keep doing it. But when stuff scares you in a way that they didn't think was possible, it sort of makes people smarter. Skydivers learn from other people's mistakes. Unfortunately, that's just the way it works. But there's a lot of technology now. I was actually talking to a couple buddies last night that base jump. They jump off cliffs and bridges and things like that. And now they're using drone flights and GPS technology to make things safer in that way. So in skydiving, parachute manufacturers put a lot of R&D into making sure their equipment is safe. And just in the last 5 years, there's been some big advancements in safety in parachute manufacturing. And I personally bought one of those types of parachutes a couple of years ago, and it just makes skydiving a little bit better now for me.
That's crazy. What's been one of the things that you've seen or witnessed that you learned from, and what was the lesson you learned from it?
Um, Never trust anybody. When people jump out of the airplane, if they go before you, you're supposed to leave what's called exit separation, so you're not very close in free fall when you're doing 200 kilometers an hour. But people sometimes don't do what they intend to do or what they say they're going to do, and then they change. Then parachutes can open up too close to each other, and if your parachute's hit, it's a really good way to die. So I try to be safe like that. But there's been close calls. But it's just like, people get a reputation. And if you don't like that person's reputation, then don't skydive with them, or don't even get on the airplane with people like that. But everybody grows up and gets smarter. It just takes a while for people to realize that because skydivers have a certain type of personality, and they just have fun until they don't. But I just like to try to be safe. But at the same time, I've got a lot of knowledge in this sport. When people ask me for advice, I'll give it to them. I'm not going to offer it to them if just because I want to give it to them because I think they're being a jackass. Because ultimately, skydivers aren't going to listen to somebody unless they ask for the advice.
So you said one thing that really kind of caught me. You said never trust anybody. And is that something that kind of stays in the skies? Because my mind automatically thinks about connection and how important
Yeah.
connection is, in relationship to other people in your life. So is that something that is sort of a rule to live by in the skies for safety reasons more so, or
Um,
does it?
well, that's a little harsh saying never trust anybody.
Mm,
Obviously I do trust a lot of people, but at the same time, people can make mistakes. When you're doing 200 kilometers an hour and someone's supposed to be 200 feet away from you and they're 50 feet away instead, um, you know, things can happen. There's a lot of science involved on how that can happen. Um, but also, like, um, my girlfriend thinks that I'm a very safe driver
mm,
because I've saved us from getting rear-ended one time when we were on vacation, and literally this person didn't see the stoplight or whatever, and all I heard was this screech behind us, and I just drove off to the side very calmly, and the car missed us by a foot or so, but they were doing probably 50 miles an hour, and we were stopped. And she was just like, "How did you know that was happening?" I'm like, "My head's on a swivel. It's like skydiving. You're looking around because you never know what people are going to do." And I'm like that in skydiving too. But with
mm.
my coworkers, it's a little bit of a different story because I've been working with them for so long. It's like you can have conversations with them, but you don't have to say anything. We just trust that we're going to do our jobs properly and predictable and
Yeah.
things like that to make each other safer.
Yeah, when I hear
Does that
you,
answer your question?
go ahead.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, when I hear you reframe it a little bit, it makes me think that you meant because you say one thing, I hear one thing. I mean, that's just life,
Yeah.
right? And I, so for me, I'm just like, oh, so you learn who to trust in some way.
Yes. And sometimes that's a long-term learning as well. And sometimes it's just a matter of being in the plane a couple times with somebody or watching them do their thing. Or sometimes it's literally 2 or 3 years later. It's like, well, you're not an idiot anymore. Good for you.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
finally learned. Um,
That's
you
so
know,
cool.
people grow up in skydiving and all of a sudden, they know what they're doing or they're an instructor now. And all of a sudden you learn more stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that so I jumped in August, and now I'm like, gosh, it's been almost a month. And like I said, sometimes I feel like there's this like skydiver high, and I'm like, I don't want it to go away, and yet at the same time, I don't want to chase it either. Um, so there's two things I kind of wanted to ask you. Is there an element of chase in it that like going time after time like is kind of like you want to experience something that it gives you, and so you would need to experience it again, like almost like a
Um,
healthy habit for your your
I
well-being.
like I like to say that I feed off the adrenaline. Like if you jump all day consistently, like once an hour or something like that, whether it's for fun or for work, the adrenaline just keeps you alive. It keeps you going. Um, I get paid to skydive, so it's a pretty cool thing. Like one of the most popular questions I get asked by customers is, "Do you ever get bored of this? Do you still have fun doing this?" I'm like, some people are more fun than others, um, depending on their experience on what they're going on. But at the same time, I only see them for literally for half an hour at a time. So if I get a guy that's being, unfortunately, they're being a pain in the ass, um, I don't see them half an hour from now. Um, I'm still going to give them a professional experience. I still have fun doing it because like the 20-year-old guys, those are the ones that are usually the most scared. And I know that. I can't tell them that because they won't listen to me. Because what do I know? I've only been doing it for half my life. So, um, but I laugh at them when people are scared. But I'm still going to offer the same product for someone who's having a blast. Um, Occasionally, I've got to pull on my psychologist hat and calm people down and things like that. But that's just all part of the game.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it more fun because you're dealing with all sorts of different personalities. People do it for different reasons. Um, People don't know that they're going to do it a second time. They just want to do a tandem and experience it because their friends did and said it was cool. But I work with a few guys that I took on their first skydives, and now they're instructors. So that's really cool to talk about that as well. And seeing somebody from their first skydive where they're a total newbie and don't know anything to being a professional coworker.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really neat thing to see that because I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
And
I'd say
that's
one.
also, no, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you're
Cut each
fine.
other off.
I'd say, like, in my line of work, I always encourage and try as often as I can to just sort of, if someone's over here, and I'm over here, to kind of gauge, where I can meet them a little bit closer to where they are without being in it with them, right? Like, so if they're ready
Yeah,
to have a panic attack, I don't want to have a panic attack with them, but I can't be, Rosie Pollyanna either because they're not going to be able to connect with me. And
yeah.
I would say, just from my own personal experience with you, you were very calm. Like it was almost wherever I was, you just sort of met me at a bit of a confidence level above. But in terms of like the emotional piece, the nervousness piece, it was just, you were just cool and calm. And I didn't ever have, people ask me often, like, how did it feel like when you were like going to jump out of the plane? And I was like, honestly, like before the door opens and you're like, okay, it's time to get really strapped up and we're strapped together and I was sitting on your knee. I remember Rob turning to me and going like, how you doing? And I was just like, honestly, I feel like I'm sitting on my dad's lap. Like I felt so safe. Like in a really good way. I mean that in a really
Yeah,
good way. Like I just felt safe, I felt protected, I felt secure. I was just like, let's go. So,
that's good. That's kind of what I'm actually trying to project to people. Um, 'Cause I've worked with other people, like other instructors, and some of them have like I call it putting on my instructor hat, which is very professional. But some of them put on their alter ego. They turn into somebody else. Sometimes that's like almost a false sense of security for themselves because they have to turn into this other person to give themselves confidence, which can instill confidence in their person that they're taking. Um, some people feed into that, some people don't. Um, and I'm just, every instructor that I work with has their own little thing. But the ones I really enjoy working with are the ones that are just themselves. They have this calm demeanor to them. They do their job professionally, and their customers enjoy it.
mhm.
And I've worked with guys that are like the surfer dudes. Everything's super cool and laid back, and then there's the super hyper ones that really pump people up. And it's I don't want to change who I am. I just want to offer my professionalism experience, and then the customer can get out of it whatever they get out of it. Because if I try to pump people up and they don't want that, but they're too scared to tell me that, it can backfire. So
Mhm.
I'm the same guy every time, and
And
I just
and
want people to
yeah,
enjoy it.
there's a huge thing with heart-based leadership. I'm always saying like there is not a one size fits all. And so you get that because that's what you're doing in your work. You
Yeah,
you're creating space for them to experience what it is that they're going to experience. And you're providing a vessel in some way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And people are there for different reasons. Some people want to do a skydive to conquer their fear of heights, which I don't know if that actually even works, because when you do a skydive, it's so high and unrealistic. Um, but people are scared because they're in their head in their own way, right? And my immediate reaction to people like that are like, "Are you scared of Google Maps?" And they look at me confused and they're like, "No." I'm like, "Well, that's kind of what it looks like when you look out the door of an airplane. It looks like a giant map below you, and it just gets a little closer as we go down. And it's windy and it's noisy.
Hmm.
It's but people say the scariest part's leaving the airplane. And I'm like, well, that's the best part to me. Like that's the funnest part when you do a flip or you go upside down and you watch the airplane fly away from you when you're doing 200 kilometers an hour. It's interesting. So, but people get out of it whatever they're going to get out of it.
Hmm.
They may have expectations, whether they're met or not. That's kind of up to them and how
Hmm.
they get it. Like you've been on a high for a little while, and some people want that high back. It's like an adrenaline drug, so they go do it again. Or there's people that do it once and say thanks very much. Or there's people that come out on their birthday every year
Hmm.
and they have no intentions on doing it on their own, but they just want to have fun.
Hmm.
So it's different.
So for you, what do you think it gives you? Because like I kind of hear that you introduce yourself as, kind of call it the sky man. What's your email address too? Isn't it called
Sky freak.
Sky Freak? Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it like something you do, more so something you are, both? Like,
I just when I was picking an email address, I just like I liked skydiving, and I was just, it wasn't my first choice. It was what Gmail accepted, right? I can't remember my first couple of choices, but it was I chose that one because that's one that they gave. Because realistically, I wanted one that was my name, but someone already had that one, so I couldn't get it. So then I'm like, well, skydiving, sky, and then um, my Instagram, skyfreek Dave, and so it's just kind of stuck. Um, but it's not that I'm freaky. It's just I don't know. It's been my life for over half my life. So it's interesting how I became so immersed in it. And it's not just taking people for skydives either. I work at the indoor place. I also am one of the few people in the province that does parachute maintenance. There's literally 3 people in Alberta that take care of parachutes and make sure they're maintained properly and pack the emergency parachutes and stuff. I'm also the only person in Alberta that has sewing machines that does fabric repairs on the parachute system. So that's a big part of my winter is taking care of parachutes, making sure they're in tip-top shape for the spring, so we can skydive all summer. And parachutes, as you can imagine, 200 kilometers an hour, they're made out of essentially tent material. So, they take a beating. So I got to make sure they're maintained properly.
Of course. We do. It's like repairing over the season to make sure that you can still do the things that feed
Yeah,
you, right? Yeah. If you
yeah.
don't
It's
repair it.
like it's like cars. You got to do oil changes once in a while, and that's what parachute systems get too.
Mhm.
Every single one gets inspected at least once a year to make sure that it's good to go for the
Mm.
summer.
Can you imagine your life right now without skydiving?
Oh yeah, there's
Yeah.
there's other things in life that you can be doing. It's just kind of the life direction that I chose. A year ago, I started working at the indoor place. It's it's not really skydiving, but it's very very similar in a lot of ways with the what we call tunnel culture. It's a lot like working on a drop zone. It's the same type of personalities. It's instructing. It's teamwork. You're dependent on other instructors to do their job properly as well, to make your job safe at the same time. And you're flying people. It's just
Hmm.
different because I'm standing beside them, and they're flying and I'm balancing them. But I get to work in the wintertime. You can't skydive in Alberta in the wintertime unless you're crazy and occasionally do a winter jump, which is possible sometimes.
Is it?
Landing in a foot of fresh powder is kind of a cool feeling,
Sure.
but it's really cold.
Yeah.
So dressing like you're going skiing to go skydiving is, you kind of do it once and you're like, yeah, that was fun, but no, I'm not going to do that again.
Too bulky? Is it too bulky? What is it?
It's bulky. You need your dexterity with your fingertips to fly your parachute and to open your parachute and stuff to make it safe. Um, so it really depends, but it's beautiful to skydive in the wintertime because
I'm
the
sure.
ground just looks so much different.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's so
It's like a
cool.
black and white photograph
Yeah.
underneath you. It's really cool.
Yeah. So, like, one of the things I always love talking about is just sort of how the heart leads you in what you do. Like
Yeah.
how, yeah, how's your heart? How do you lead from your heart in what you do?
Well, just loving your job.
Mm.
Um, you know, I get paid to skydive or get paid to fly people, and the pure enjoyment that people get. Like when I'm doing a skydive, 90% of the time I'm looking at the back of your head.
Yeah.
But I'm also seeing what you're seeing. And yeah, it's old hat for me and I've seen it 1,000 times, but people are just blown away by it. And the conversations you have under the parachute, I feed off the energy and it makes me happy that people are happy doing what they're doing.
What
And
are
it's a
some
once in a
conver
lifetime experience for some
Yeah, it is
people.
a once
So
in a lifetime.
yeah.
What is like a really unique conversation you've had under the parachute with someone?
Um, oh, there's so many to choose from. Um, 2 stories, but they actually happened this weekend. Um, There's a gentleman I met at the indoor place this past winter. He's an ex skydiver. He did about 1,000 skydives in the 80s. which is incredible to do that amount back then, because it was just slow airplanes and he had to be doing it a lot. He was a skydiving instructor like I was, but obviously different, probably way sketchier back in the day. But, you know, life happened. He stopped skydiving. And then he started to gain a whole bunch of weight and then couldn't skydive anyways. But then he found out about the indoor tunnel and started flying once he lost some weight, because there's a weight limit of 300 pounds to fly inside.
Okay.
And he was 340 or 350 or something like that. So he took it as a life goal to lose weight so he could fly in the tunnel. He comes once a week now and he loves it. And we've been planning it for, I don't know, probably 2 months. He was turning 65 this past Saturday, a couple of days ago. And he wanted to skydive on his birthday and he wanted me to take him. And I was like, sure, we can do that. And so we booked it, planned it. And then just by fluke, a giant airplane was booked for a kids cancer fundraising tandem event. And he showed up after the event. And anyways, long story short, took him on a skydive. He loved it. It was just a flood of memories coming back. Like when the free fall was super easy because it's like riding a bike, you never forget. So he did awesome. And under the parachute, we just had the longest conversation. We were just talking the whole time. And he's like, he was almost crying. Like he's a big dude. He's like 6'4", an older guy. He was like taking my dad for a skydive almost. And he almost started crying. He was having so much fun and the memories that came back. And he's an ex-skydiver, so he knows that skydivers love beer. So he brought a case of beer to share with after the skydiving was over. And so he was hanging out, having a drink with us at the end of the day. And he kept coming up to me every 5 minutes. He's like, today was so much fun. Like, thank you so much for doing this. This is so neat. And then he just would yell out, I jumped out of an airplane today. And everybody would scream, yay! And it was just so neat because he was just so excited. And it was funny in a way because his wife was with him, and non-skydiving spouses just sometimes don't get it, the excitement and the community and the culture that we have at a drop zone. And she wanted to go and he wanted to stay so badly, like the whole night, and just probably drink beer with everybody until the night was over kind of thing. But he had to go. And but I've never seen a smile so big on this man, and I've known him for, I don't know, about a year. So it was really cool.
Yeah.
So it's like, it almost gets me choked up when people get so emotional about stuff like that. And then another story, I'm sorry if I'm rambling on.
No, I was gonna say, what's the other story too? That's so beautiful. But
the other story was, it happened yesterday. It was actually a memorial event for an ex-skydiving instructor that passed away last year. He had some health issues, and he lived a good life. He was a skydiving instructor for quite a while. Anyways, he passed away, and a lot of skydivers release ashes in free fall as just kind of a tribute to the fallen skydiver, so to speak. And so this was organized, and a whole bunch of Didsbury alumni showed up. Old skydivers, people that learned together, worked with this guy 20 years ago kind of thing, or if he was our instructor. He was one of my first instructors when I first started. So I had a connection from 25 years ago. And anyways, this ash dive was organized. And all of a sudden, this guy, Randy, shows up. And he was the guy that taught me my first jump course. And he was responsible for teaching many, many skydivers their first jump course. One of my bosses, who owns the skydiving center in Calgary, was taught by this gentleman as well. And I haven't seen him in 25 years. And he stopped skydiving 20 years ago because he ended up getting a bad knee and got out of the sport and stuff. And anyways, I walked up to him when I heard he was on site. And I just said his name out loud, and he looked at me like, I don't know who you are, kind of thing, right? I'm like, well, he was like, don't tell me. I'm like, I'm not gonna, I need you to guess. And I'm like, told him that my hair was a lot longer in the 90s, and it was much more blonde instead of gray. And and he still didn't get it. And he's like shaking his head and he's thinking. And all I said was Prince George. And he goes, Dave. And I was like, holy crap, that was great. It spawned a memory in him. And anyways, we had a small conversation and it was good to see him. But I was busy. I was doing other skydives. And I was like, and then I turned around and walked back to him. I'm like, can I take you for a skydive today? And then he's like, that's actually probably a really cool idea. And then I walked away. I had to go work. And then half an hour later, I saw on the list of who I'm taking that I was taking him. And I was like, this is really cool. And it was kind of what we call a full circle. So I took him on a tandem, which was actually his first tandem, because when he learned, he didn't do a tandem. So he had never done a tandem. And he has thousands of skydives under his belt, and he just hasn't jumped in a long time. So I took him for a tandem skydive, and he had a little vial of, interestingly enough, the instructor that passed away, his name is Dave as well. But he had a little vial of ashes with him. So we released it in free fall. And then of course the emotion of that. But when the parachute opened up, I'm like, hey, you want to steer the parachute? Because I thought he was going to be like my buddy Mike, who wanted to fly the whole thing. And he's like, no, you got this. I'm just enjoying the ride and seeing a view that I haven't seen in 20 years. And he was so choked up about it. He's like, this is flooding me with memories. And I could hear the sound of his voice kind of cracking a little bit. And that kind of put me in a place too. I was like, stop it. But at the same time, I had a job to do and kind of get us to the ground safely. And I was a little concerned about his bad knee when we came in for a landing, and we landed in front of a bunch of his old buddies, and they all went up and hugged him. It was just such a great experience that I got to take my old instructor for a jump. It was really cool. And I immediately messaged my friend who I did my first skydive with and sent him a picture of us. I'm like, guess who I just took for a skydive? And he's like, no way, that's so cool.
That is so cool.
I imagine him in another province, he's probably having all these memories from 30 years ago too. And it's like, it's really neat how this can flow just from doing a simple skydive, connected literally dozens of people together yesterday. It was really cool.
Oh, life truly.
Anyways, ramble.
No, but I'm just like, life is truly a gift of giving and receiving, and like hearing your stories of those like they're iconic people to you. How they just came back into your life, and you were able to give them a gift. They gave you a gift. You gave them a gift, and it doesn't always happen that you see that person. Like, I think there's a lot of trusting that, yes, I do good in this world and the good will ripple, and you don't necessarily always get to see it, but how cool is that in that culture and in that circle, you're able to see it.
Yeah.
So cool. So, okay, I got to ask you two more questions. First question I want to ask you is, having jumped so many times, how do you keep it new for you?
How do I keep it new? Moving around a little bit. Like, I've recently changed where I do most of my work. I've added different drop zones, so it's a different set of people, different ownership and things like that. It's like not a fresh start, but it's just a different environment, different people, and it's like doing the same job at a different company. And it was like a fresh start. And that's why I wanted to work at the indoor place as well. It was just something new, still in the same genre of work and stuff. But it's a very small community. Like, whenever I take a passenger, I'm like, hey, have you ever done this before? And if it's yes, I'll immediately say when and where.
Yeah. And
because I know literally people all over the world that do this for a living. And I'm like, if I know where it was, I'm like, do you remember the name of the guy who took you? And 9 out of 10 times it's like, no, I don't remember the guy's name. I'm like, what did he look like? And if it's in certain places, they'll describe the guy, and I'm like, was it this guy? And they're like, yeah, it was. And it was just funny. And then, like, there's a guy in Vernon that does it professionally, and he's got thousands of skydives now, and he takes people for tandems. When people say that, oh yeah, I jump with Rocky in Vernon, I'm like, I took him on his first skydive. And they're like, really? And there's a few people like that are professionals in the sport in Western Canada that their first skydive was with me. and it's neat that they just kind of took off like I did, and they share the same passion. And it's pretty easy to get up and go to work when you have to go skydiving for a living.
Hmm.
you know
Well, I think it's also a realistic, sometimes in life you're really passionate about something, but the driver motivation will go up or down. And
yeah,
so keeping it new is a really good thing because it just helps you to shift something in your environment or something you're seeing or focusing on to keep that
yeah,
alive, right?
yeah. Like a couple of years ago, like for 15 years, I was a full-time skydiving employee and totally immersed in the sport. And
Mm.
then 2 years ago, I decided that I'm not going to have a full-time commitment. I'm not going to be the guy that is, you know, lives on the drop zone or shows up 6 days a week because that's what I committed to. Um, I basically show up when I feel like it or when my schedule allows it. And I'm like, I'm here to work, put me to work. And, and some days I go there just to hang out and they put me to work. But I can say no. That's what's the beauty of being a part-time guy now is it's like, if I'm done, I'm done.
Hmm.
Quite often when you say you're done means you got to do one more, but whatever, I'm not going to say no to someone. But it's really neat to have that freedom. And I think that's put a spark back into it as well.
Mm.
Also, a couple of years ago, I bought a new parachute for myself, and having nicer, newer, safer equipment has put a spark back into skydiving for me. And getting all the training and stuff at the indoor skydiving place has made me a better flyer because I've always been a working skydiver and I never put enough fun for myself into it. Like, yeah, I still have fun doing the job, but I didn't do it enough for fun for myself. And this past summer, I've jumped more for myself than I have in the last 3 years combined.
Hmm.
So it's I'm on an upward trend of having fun in my life right now. So, and then there's other aspects in that. My partner is very supportive of it. She's a skydiver as well. Um, and she doesn't want me to work as hard as I have. So that's fortunate for me as well that she helps me with that.
I'm so glad that you can. It's a
Yeah,
gift to be able to. Yeah, an opportunity for sure. Um, okay, I could ask you so many more questions. I mean, we could talk for hours probably,
I
but
know I can just ramble on, right?
it's so nice. I guess, the one final question I kind of want to ask you, and especially I'm interested in your response. I think I know based on some of the questions that we've gone over when we weren't recording that it's a unique perspective. But can you describe like what is a world that you want to live in?
I think everybody should try skydiving once because it could point people in a little different direction. Um, it's really hard to explain unless you've done a skydive. Like you've experienced it and it's taken your life how it did. Um, and some people they just do it and they're like, yeah, I did a skydive. Yeah, it was
Mhm.
fun. And some people are just like, I need to turn this into a crazy hobby and get immersed into it and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So I think if everybody tries it once, it might make people happier.
Yeah, it's added so many layers. I mean,
Yeah.
happy is definitely an emotion that I felt. Gosh, hopeful is another one that I felt. I actually, when I first landed, we like, our friend Rob's got video footage and he's like, "So how was that?" And I'm like, I don't even have a word for it.
Yeah. It's really
Like,
hard to explain.
and I could have just sat in the grass for like an hour
Yeah.
and not moved because it was just that profound for me. There's so many layers. Like I said, I wrote for like days about it.
Yeah.
But one of the things you also said is that people aren't supposed to be able to fly. So
Yeah.
it's
That's why
cool
it's a
that,
lot of
yeah,
fun.
tell me about that. Like, what's your perspective on that and how
Well,
that,
it's like scuba diving. People aren't supposed to be able to be underwater for an hour at a time. It's just not natural. But technology allows us to do things that 100 years ago you couldn't do. Um, and I think that's the draw to it. Like, well, I'm not supposed to do that. Like, I'm not supposed to drive 100 miles an hour, but if my car can, I will. I'll try it, and it's fun. And people, once they try something and realize how much fun it is, they sometimes don't understand why it's fun, but they just want to do it again and they want to catch that high. imagine that's probably what it's like with certain drugs. But adrenaline's a drug. It's just your body produces it
Mm-hmm.
in different ways and different levels depending on what you're doing. And
Yeah.
people just want that high. You want to keep going, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, to some people, skydiving is an addiction. Some people, it's a job. Some people, it's a one-time thing. They tried it, thought it was cool.
And for
Um,
you, it sounds like it's all of those three.
Pretty much, yeah. And that depends on the day, the people I'm with, where I am, how I'm feeling, what I did the day before, stuff like that. So even weather based, if it's a beautiful day, it's awesome. But if it's a, kind of a sketchy wind day and we're still doing what we're doing, it's not as fun. It's slightly more dangerous, but we still do it and we get it done and still have fun doing it.
So on the best possible day and you have the best possible dive, what do you feel walking away from that?
That's actually one of my favorite parts of the skydive is walking back. Um, you're just like, some people can see auras in people, and if you could see the glow that people have when they walk off the field, um, they're smiling bigger, they're still on that adrenaline high. um, People are walking back with their friends discussing how much fun the skydive was and things like that. um, and one of the favorite things that I get to do is jumping with my spouse, holding hands, walking back from a skydive to the packing area to go do it again. And if someone captures a picture of people walking back, that's when you really realize the high. It's like, why am I smiling so big? And it's like, well, because you just went for a skydive. It was super fun. And that's why you want to go do it again. And it's, you just keep doing it because, life's about having fun, but also being safe and living. Right. And
Yeah.
that's just how I've chosen to do it.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'll leave our listeners with is find something, choose something so you
Yeah.
feel like you're living.
Yeah, whether it's skydiving or driving a car or riding a unicycle or whatever, just pick something and have fun and keep doing it.
Yeah, totally.
And if it stops being fun, stop it. You
Totally.
know, do something different. If it's not fun and becomes a chore, you gotta go somewhere else. You know,
Yeah.
even if it's the same thing in a different environment, maybe that's the spark you need. So
Yeah. Well, great advice. Keep that heart pumping with fresh blood.
yeah, exactly. Keeps you young.
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much, Dave.